Hi, I'm talking today about the Anti-Federalists. Um, some important Anti-Federalist members to remember are George Mason, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, Robert Yates. Also, James Monroe, who later became president, was actually an Anti-Federalist and did not want the original Constitution to be ratified. Uh, for nearly a century after the Revolutionary War, when they decided to vote on the Constitution and ratify that. As a group, the Anti-Federalists were virtually ignored. It is just as important to know both sides of a situation. It's not playing devil's advocate. It's called knowing the whole story, the big picture. Um, it actually took work of many scholars such as Gordon Wood and others to help bring the Anti-Federalists out of the dark. Revolutions like this, or like the one that happened in the United States, have happened in almost every country in Europe. Similar examples are also to be found in ancient Greece and Rome. There are instances of people losing their liberty by their own actions and then getting it back during, through other means. This is what some of the Anti-Federalists were worried about. They were worried about losing that liberty. They did not want to lose what they had fought so hard to gain from England. The Anti-Federalists had a profound distrust of the new constitution and government. Patrick Henry feared that the new government would end up like the House of Commons in England, which was full of corruption and bribery at that time. He feared that our new legislators would sell, and I quote, the rights of the people. They also wanted the Constitution to have a Bill of Rights, which would protect things such as religion and free speech. This is a direct result of the rights they had as British citizens or subjects. They may not have had exactly what we would consider as free speech and religious freedom, but they had a degree of that. And that's actually the Bill of Rights is actually one of the issues that Brutus addressed in his second letter to the editor. Brutus was commonly believed to be Robert Yates. However, just like Molly Pitcher during the actual Revolutionary battles, we don't know 100% that they were Robert Yates, or that Molly Pitcher was the other woman. The Bill of Rights were even addressed by the Federalists, but only near the end of their series. Um, I think it's the next to the last article. It is to be noted that the Articles of the Confederation did not have a Bill of Rights either. George Mason felt that current as of November 1787, the House did not fully represent the people. He felt the members would therefore not be concerned with the true impact of their actions. George Mason also felt that the system was tedious, intricate, and expensive, and it was one that, as in England, permitted the rich to rule over the poor masses. Uh, Many Anti-Federalists felt that the size of the government would hinder its success. In the Middlecalf book, it states that there were 55 House members, which would easily lead to mismanaged power. They also felt that longer terms in office would lead to representatives losing their connection to the people. The Anti-Federalists wanted to keep the power in the states. They did not want to transfer it to a federal government. If the convention had simply amended the Articles of Confederation, they would have been happy. It can be argued maybe some of those amendments were a Bill of Rights, since it didn't have it. According to the Anti-Federalists, the states would be encouraged to participate in national causes by civic duty. They would be guided by morality, whereas in the monarchy did so out of a fear of repercussions. Um, if the states did not comply of what was asked of them, it wasn't because they were just being belligerent. It would be because they did not have what was requested. This is, of course, in an ideal world. Um, a prevailing thought among Anti-Federalists was that the executive branch held too much power. As George Mason pointed out, they could pardon treason, but then have asked that person to commit the treason. In full well telling the person who was going to commit that action that they would be pardoned and they would basically get away with it. And the Anti-Federalists believe that by placing power with the elected men, it could lead to negative consequences unless there were safeguards in place. They thought that the then proposed Constitution did not sufficiently address this. They felt they needed more order there. A few central arguments that the Anti-Federalists had include that each substantial societal interest should have a representative in Congress, especially in the more numerous House of Representatives, so that you have that equal representation across the people. That smaller states aren't shortchanged, or larger states do not have an undue influence. Also, the representation aids in maintaining an electoral responsibility. You need the representatives to be one of the people in order for them to effectively vote for the people, for them to maintain confidence in the people. And you have to maintain, or rather, you have to preserve that system of interest representation. It can't just start one way and then end up the other. It's as a result of this, they tended to lean towards a smaller government so that you can more easily maintain that interest. Another point to which the Anti-Federalists had issue was the lack of protection against a standing army in a time of peace. Patrick Henry said, and I quote, "A standing army we shall have also to execute the exorable commands of tyranny." Sorry about that. Can't read my writing there. He was more in favor of a militia, not so much a standing army. So when you needed the power, the people would gather up and fight. Obviously with a little training. They would still have garrisons and things like that, but it would be controlled by Congress and not this specific states. And that ties into the fears of representatives not acting in the best interest of the people. If your militia is going to be controlled by the federal government, you want your representative in the federal government to remember where they come from and who put them there so that they vote and stay there. The issue of a standing army was one of the things addressed by the rather infamous or famous Brutus. He tried to explain how the new Constitution allowed for a standing army and how it was something that left a sour taste in your mouth. Just the idea of a standing army, even though today that's normal, it's expected. The idea of not having a standing army today is what's so unusual, but times are different. It really wasn't so much the army as what they represented that the Anti-Federalists were against or had issue with. They felt that for the people to have confidence in their army and government, they needed to know who was leading that army. By not knowing who was in charge, this could lead to a mistrust of both the army and the government. In one of the articles I read, written by Mrs. Diamond, it says that there would be no other recourse than that of a standing army to enforce the laws. This is the most terrible of possibilities. So basically, the standing army would enforce the laws, which was enacted by a government who they had no faith in. So it all ties back to maintaining the people, the connection with the federal government or the government and who put them there. That's something that we still struggle with today. At least I feel that they do. Another issue that several Anti-Federalists had with the new Constitution, or with the people who were voting there, was regarded slavery. At that point, it was obviously still legal. Patrick Henry felt that the risk of adopting the Constitution was the possibility of the northern states abolishing slavery, which was an institution that many Southern planters were still heavily dependent on. He felt that they can enact such legislation for two reasons. The first was that everybody knew that slavery was evil, and that is a direct quote from him. The second is the Constitution would enact the majority rule on a national scale, meaning that the majority could vote against slavery and therefore abolishing slavery. That's technically the government wouldn't do it; the people would. Um, Patrick Henry stated in 1788, "Such a government is incompatible with the genius of republicanism. There will be no checks, no rebalances in this government." So he wanted that to be limited, not just regarding slavery, but regarding all the issues there. Um, Patrick Henry, um, his thoughts on that slavery was largely ignored, um, and it actually isn't included in that Federalist Manifest, which, obvious reasons, it doesn't sound good. Although that could be seen as a little bit of revisionist history. Um, where his fears come from are unknown. His fears about the northern states taking over the South or making changes for the South. At the time of the ratification of the Constitution, white Northerners, for the most part, were committed to keeping the Africans as slaves. I shouldn't say they were committed to it, but they were not actively protesting against it on a large scale. He just distrusted his northern neighbors. Um, he also tied in a fear, or I shouldn't say, but one of his beliefs, like with slavery, he tied that in with taxation. He felt that the northern states could band together and raise and enact taxes to a point that forced the southern slaveholders to get rid of their slaves. That would be the only possibility, would be to free the slaves. So you don't technically abolish slavery, you just make it incredibly counterproductive to own them. Um, Neither Patrick Henry or George Mason were supportive of the Three-Fifths Compromise, which is eventually used. They felt that the Northerners would find a loophole, that taxation issue possibly being one of them. James Monroe, who later became president, actually agreed with Mason and Henry on the subject of slavery. He just approached it in a different manner. Um, it's all about how you, I shouldn't say it's all about, but it's often about how you present your argument as much as what the argument is in itself. If you present it in the right way, you might get more people to agree with you, or at least see your point. They might not agree with your point, but they will see your point. Um, are the fears that the Anti-Federalists had warranted today? Did any of the things that they stated come true? That really is a tricky question because, slavery was abolished, but it was, nearly 100 years later in a war, fought North versus South. So that it leads to a little bit of their fears, but no, I don't think entirely. And, did federal courts try and limit the powers of the states? You can argue, or not, you can find examples arguing that point, and you can find examples the other way. It just depends on what you read, when you read it. There's just plenty of examples of reasons why the Federalists were right, too. Yeah, they were on the winning side, so obviously they're gonna, have reasons. Um, Slavery was not the only issue that divided the people. I mean, there's so many issues that divided the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Taxes, how to tax, what to tax, representation, who and how they represented people. Um, all the arguments were tied together by their desire to make the country into what it is today. Um, and they all wanted to create the United States of America. They all wanted their country to survive and to prosper. It's just how they wanted it to prosper and what means they were willing to use in order to get it to prosper. That were the big differences.